I call that the itty bitty shitty committee, which is that inner voice in your head that's just like, it is telling you every single thing that might possibly go wrong and how you're definitely going to screw it up and you're going to just fold under pressure and you're going to embarrass your trainer and, everything.
Bring them in on the rail, let it jog. Please, on the rail, let it jog.
Alrighty, everybody. We are back with another On the Rail podcast episode and very, very excited to bring you this guest today. This is Meredith Brisson. She is somebody that I actually connected with about this time last year. It was in the middle July-ish, I think, in 2021. She is a therapist and specializes in teaching equestrians mindset issues, improvements, that type of thing. And I was struggling with my own issues in the show pen last year and really, really, really struggling with it. And I'm not somebody that just wants to rest on my own laurels and kind of wallow in self-pity. And I wanted help with it. So I just did a quick Google search, kind of reviewed some people. It seems like the hunter jumper dressage world has not a lot, but more of these people out there than what exists in our stock horse industry. But I reached out to her, we connected, kind of told her what I was struggling with, and she definitely thought she could help me. We had a few phone calls and stuff that really proved to be beneficial for me. And I know a lot of us struggle with the mindset and mentality thing when it comes to performing in the show pen and stress and pressure and all of that. So that's kind of the reasoning we wanted to bring her on today. So Meredith, I will turn it over to you. And if you want to just introduce a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you. I'm so glad to be on here with you today. And to be really transparent, I'm feeling a little nervous-sided, which is the word that my daughter and I have coined for, that like butterflies when you're a little bit nervous and you're a little bit excited and you can't really tell the difference. So, we all go through it.
That's great.
But I'm really psyched to be here. And thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I am that mindset and courage coach is something that I hope we can all learn more about, because I know I didn't have one when I was heavy in the competition world. So I wish I knew a little bit more about it also.
Right. So what's your background when it comes to the therapy side as well as the horse side too?
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of my history. So I started riding when I was 8 years old. My family moved a lot. We moved about every 3 years when I was growing up until high school. And so I was pretty lucky when I was 8, we moved to Connecticut, and my mom said, let's try to find something here that you couldn't do at the last place we lived. And there were lots of horse farms around me. So I decided to try riding. And it was like the books. I just absolutely, from the moment I started, fell in love with it. And it really became an important part of my identity, an important part of kind of anchoring me through all the moves that I did in my growing up. I always had riding to take with me. And I did the sport of 3-day eventing through my 20s. I had an amazing chestnut thoroughbred mare who was just the bravest thing you've ever seen, and was really lucky to get to compete her through the upper levels in eventing. And then I say I moved to the dark side and I started doing dressage and worked with a lot of young horses and got to do quite a bit of competition in the dressage world. And then I started to really experience some of the classic symptoms of burnout, which for me meant I was doing something that I loved with people that I loved. I was with, a trainer that I adored. I was riding fabulous horses. I was living on a gorgeous farm. All the pieces were there that should have led to what you would think would be satisfaction. And the joy was just not present anymore. So I also was looking to kind of fill in some other parts of my life that, I think those of us who have been in the equestrian industry and in that competition world for a long time know that it is a 24/7 all encompassing way of life. So I actually took a big chunk of time off from riding and from the horse world. And I went back to school and I got my master's in clinical social work. And I met my husband and I got married and had my daughter. And I opened up just a traditional practice working with kids and teenagers and adults and families, you name it. I was working with them. And it probably won't surprise many people to know that just organically, a lot of what I was working with was centered around anxiety. So I naturally became really invested in learning about, different ways of managing anxiety, really where anxiety comes from and what it looks like in different contexts. And then I decided, let me put my passions together and started thinking about working exclusively with equestrian riders. I was so aware that so many of the folks that I was working around in the equestrian industry, whether they were professionals or amateurs, were putting so much time and effort and money into the sport. And a lot of them were not enjoying it the way, either they were scared, they were fearful, or they were, like spending so much time preparing for that competition and were spending the entire competition in the porta potty where, so, I wanted to be a resource so that we could actually access more joy in this sport that people really dedicate so much to. So that's when I created my practice, and I now work as a sports psychology coach for equestrians. And I also call myself a mindset and courage coach because that's really the parts that I, focus the most on.
Absolutely. That's the best introduction because I think the majority of us, if not all of us, can relate to exactly what you just said. Anxiety in the show pen is something that is so common, and we all think we're the worst ones at it and we're the only ones that have it. But, we talk to people, and everybody's faces anxiety. I think right now there's a particular with the economy and stress. It's just a big time for burnout and it's really, really common. So this is a perfect time to have you on. So with that said, what do you think is unique to the mental aspect of equestrian competitions?
Ooh, that's a good question. Because certainly I think on one hand, equestrian, just horse people in general, I think are a unique breed in that, there's this real passion and dedication that I think is unique to equestrian sports because there's another being involved. And so, a lot of the time when I talk to people and really ask what it is that brings them back to, what gets you driving down the driveway, even when you are experiencing, the stress, the pressure, the anxiety you've had, we all know the horse life is not a straight line trajectory of success. And it throws at you any number of, somersaults and twists and turns. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, you don't anymore. And yet, there is this level of passion and dedication to equestrians that I think non-horse people often find puzzling, well, if it makes you so nervous, or if it's, if you're experiencing this distress, why do you keep doing it? Just go find something else to do. But more often than not, that's not even on the table for the people that I work with. And, I work with people that have some pretty major obstacles to work through. So that's one piece. And I think along those same lines, we're also dealing with the unpredictability of having another being that we're working with. So it's not like, I always laugh and say, the golfer doesn't have to pull their golf club out of the bag and say, so, how are you feeling today? Did you, get out in the paddock and run around enough? And like, is the weather okay for you? There's a level of, you can control what you are doing as the rider, but there's always going to be a level of unpredictability in what's happening with those four legs underneath you. So there, it's complex and layered. And again, like that word unpredictable comes up time and time again, because that's hard to manage. But it's also what makes us love it. So the thing that's hard is also the thing that makes us really love it, I think.
Yes, I think you're probably spot on. And that's an interesting point, and just harkens back to why all of us horse people have a little bit of a crazy in us, but we all identify with that. So it's a community of craziness. So what would you say are the biggest self-sabotaging behaviors that you run across with your typical rider? And really, how common is it to have issues, whether it's just riding, but more so with showing?
Yeah. I mean, first, I want to start just by saying how common it is when I hold a workshop and I get a bunch of people in the room, and oftentimes there's professionals and amateurs and young people and older people all together, and people start to share what their experiences have been. And almost every time, without fail, people come up to me after and say, oh my gosh, I never would have thought that so-and-so struggled with, self-esteem issues, or worrying, comparison issues, or anxiety in general about, the what ifs. So there's something really universal about it. It's just a part of the game, really. But in terms of some of the common misconceptions I think I see come across my practice time and time again, the first one is, I would say, that our goal is to be totally free of anxiety and nerves when we go into the show ring. That, like, if you're experiencing that amped up, I mean, you could list any number of names to the feeling that you get, that means there's something wrong, or that there's a problem. Because really, that feeling in you is an indicator that you're doing something important and that you give meaning to. And we want to work with that. If you were going into a show feeling cool as a cucumber, that I would almost call that complacent, like that, well, do you really care about this? And so obviously there's a spectrum, and there are levels of anxiety and negative self-talk that really can get in the way of your performance. But I always make the point that we're not looking to get rid of it altogether, because it's actually what gets you on target and like focused in a good way. And then, on top of that, anxiety is there for a reason. That's your brain's way of keeping you safe. And so, when there's that little bit of fear, that it's keeping you really aware of what you need to pay attention to. So again, no anxiety often can lead to more problems than having that healthy dose of anxiety in there. Does that make sense?
It does to me.
It's definitely an interesting way to look at it, because I always just want to not be nervous, because I feel like it just, messes up my chances of going in and putting down, a good pattern or just a great class on the rail. So I like the mental shift there of realizing that I don't need to get rid of it completely, but just switch it around to see how it would affect the way I ride.
Yeah, and sometimes, Liz, it's like the language we use around it and the meaning we give to it, because really it's a feeling often in our body that we're responding to. So it might be a little bit of a tightness in your chest, or your heart might be racing, or those butterflies in your stomach. Maybe your thoughts are a little bit faster in your head. And if we attribute that to, oh my gosh, this is me, here we go, I'm getting that anxiety, and I know that anxiety leads to poor performance, so I better not have this anxiety. You can feel, even just talking about it, the pressure and the energy gets very intense. But if we can say, kind of like when I came on here this morning, or this afternoon, what time is it? You know, I'm feeling a little bit amped up right now. And that means, of course I'm feeling amped up. I'm about to go in and do something important. And this is a really normal feeling to have. And, you sort of just greet it as, yep, there you are. Here we are. We're at a competition. This is the feeling I'm going to expect to meet at the gate, basically. And again, I don't want to minimize that there's levels of this that we're talking about clearly. And so there's certain times when, yes, it's like we need to figure out some tools to manage it and get it into a really good level of, I usually use 0 to 10 as the guide. And they say your peak performance is actually when you're at like a 4 or a 5. So we think it needs to be a 1, but peak performance is a 4 or a 5. Now, if you're at an 8, that's going to start to take you out of your thinking brain, and it's going to be really hard to remember all the steps that you need to do. But it's always surprising to people. Oh, wow, 4 or 5, that's more than you would think.
I do think relating to the thinking brain thing is one of the things I have struggled with, is just how fast things happen in the show pen. That doesn't happen when you're in the practice pen. It's like you know what you're doing, and then you get in the show pen and it seems like a million things go on at once, and it's hard to process all of those things all at once. So what do you say to that? Like, what's actually going on there, and what would we do to address that maybe?
Yeah, that's a good question. And really what I hear you saying is like, there's a way that our brain can quickly feel overwhelmed when we're in a pressure situation that maybe you don't experience in a different context. And, I always say that the antidote to overwhelm is focus. And so again, the more we can, like, most of us have a bit of a crystal ball that we can look into before we go into a pressure situation, unless this is your first time ever being in the show pen or in the show ring. But once you've done it a couple times, we can kind of say, yeah, you know what, this tends to be the pattern that I fall into when I go under pressure. And the goal then is to preemptively sort of create how you're going to meet that in the show pen. So, for instance, if we know that like the outside, what's happening on the outside of the ring tends to get into your thought process, or what's happening internally, like you get distracted by the internal feelings or thoughts that you're creating. What we want to do is come in knowing that focus is going to be your friend during this time, and to be really clear what the 2, maybe 3, no more than 3 things are that you're going to really hook your brain onto in there, so that you're not trying in the moment to think about, oh my gosh, what's my priority right now? What should I hook my brain on? Usually ahead of time, you can say, if I can really focus on these 3 things, it's going to make my performance, that much better. And we also need to remember that hopefully we can rely on our training for a certain amount of that process to happen also. So we often think, I have to think about every single step of the process in the show ring. But if we've done a, pretty good training on the way there, there's usually only a small percentage of what you're doing in there that you have to give that extra amount of focus to. And the other stuff, hopefully, is pretty automatic because we've been doing it so much at home.
Why do you say 2, maybe 3 things when it feels like there's probably 50 things going on?
Right, right. Yeah. Because believe it or not, we like to think that we're really good multitaskers and that we're capable of multitasking. But if you look at the research, our brain can actually truly only focus on one thing at a time. So it ends up just moving really quickly from one thing to the next, and one thing to the next, and one thing to the next. So if you come in and tell your brain that it needs to focus on 15 things, and when I say focus, I mean like really giving it that intentional thought, right there, it just goes, like that's where that overwhelm hits. And when we get overwhelmed, when your brain goes to the blank slate, or, it's like, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I cannot figure out, like, my brain and my body are not connecting right now. So again, it goes back to trusting that some of the stuff you have to do, you're going to intuitively, have in there. And then 2 or 3 things that you can, really give some focused attention to is about what your brain can handle in that situation. It doesn't mean the rest of the things are not important. It just means that you're going to give that focused attention to the 2 or 3 things that are going to need that the most in order to up your performance.
Can those 2 or 3 things, I assume those can shift over time as
absolutely
something becomes more intuitive, then you would maybe move your goalpost, a few steps down the road to focus on the next 2 or 3 steps.
Yeah. I have a couple of ways that we work on that. And forgive me because I work with a lot of dressage riders. So a lot of my lingo is going to be sort of in that domain. But I have an exercise that I do with a lot of riders where we just take 3 columns on a piece of paper. And 1 column is your got it's, 1 column is your struggles, and the 1 column is we call it your point grabbers. So the got it's are the things that you're going to be doing in the show ring or the show pen that, like, they're flowing. More often than not, you can do it without having to, like, really break down the steps. Like, once you learn how to drive, you don't have to think about, now move my foot over to the gas, and then it just kind of flows. So the got it's are those reliable parts of your pattern. The struggles are the parts that even at home, they're not confirmed yet. And so, unfortunately, there's no magic wand that if it's not confirmed at home, we're not going to expect that it's all of a sudden going to come together and happen reliably at a show. So, that's sort of just the reality check, right? Like, okay, if there's going to be an issue, it's probably going to be in the struggle column. And then you've got the point grabber column. That's actually the most important one, because this is the one where it's like, these are the movements or the parts of your pattern that maybe you're working on them a lot in your lessons or in your training. And if you give those parts that little bit of extra focused attention, it's going to up the quality and up the chances that it's going to go well. So it's not that you don't have it or don't know how to do it. It just takes that little bit of, like, ooh, I need to push my hands a little bit more forward, or I need to make sure that I need to focus on my position in this particular piece. So those movements and those elements in the point grabber column are the one that you give the most energy to when you go in the show ring, because those are the ones that actually have the most impact on your score generally. They're the ones that you're going to, like, have the most influence on. The struggles, you're going to do the best you can. You're going to go in there, you're going to do what you can. Yeah, and again, you're either going to get it or it's like, yep, we're still working on that. It's a work in progress. And the got it's are the ones that you're going to really assume are going to be more in that automatic place in your brain. So what it does is it really hones in on what are the parts of my pattern that I can really give that little extra bit of focus and attention to. And it helps to pull that apart.
To me, there's something really powerful about labeling your struggles as struggles and then not expecting them to either go bad or good in the show pen. It's like, we know what our struggles are, but then we're just like, oh, we go in and show and hope that it goes well. And you're kind of expecting to fail. But if you label them as a struggle and just be like, it is what it is and we're working on it, that seems to me to just remove some of the pressure off of that, instantly anyway. And it's something so simple, but it's just a reframe of the mental side of it.
Totally.
That seems really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's like, it's a work in progress. You're not saying it's not important. You're not saying that you're not going to try hard in those places, but it's like, it's just the reality. These are the parts that we're still trying to wrap our head around, whether it's the ride or the horse or the rider and the horse together. I'll just add that part of the reason I love doing this exercise, and it's really helpful to do it, throughout your show season, is that the goal is obviously that the struggles move into the point grabber column and the point grabbers move into the got it's column eventually. So it really helps you see progress and also know like when it's time to move up a level. If you have no struggles and a whole lot of got it's, gosh, you're confirmed. It is time to think about, let's move on to the next level. And if you have mostly struggles and maybe one or two got it's and a whole lot of point grabbers, then, usually it's like, yep, this is the beginning of the season. This is the beginning of the season, or I've just moved up to this level. And of course, this is where we're at. I'm not confirmed yet. So it just normalizes the progression that we don't all come in, fully confirmed at a level. And that's why we keep training. That's why we do the hours at home, is to see those movements move.
Can emotion ever be a good thing for a writer?
Ooh.
And I know you've talked about we should recognize the anxiety and consider it normal and still perform. But is there any real actual benefit to having these emotions?
Well, so emotion is a pretty broad term, right? And I would say absolutely emotion can be a benefit and a good thing for a writer. Because frankly, we are emotional beings. And to think that we are going to go in and be robotic, honestly takes the dynamics out of why we do this, right? So I think, there's no such thing as a bad emotion, and emotions are really data that are just giving us information. And so if you can look at it that way as, what am I noticing is coming up for me? And then letting that be feedback for how we can deepen our process and really understand ourselves better. That in itself is a huge benefit to writers. And when I say that, emotions are really, they start with a thought. So we have a circumstance. I'm going into the show ring and, I really want to do well. That might be the circumstance. Going into the show ring isn't what is creating anxiety. It's your thoughts about going into the show ring that are creating the anxiety. The circumstance is neutral. So what the emotion is telling you is like, for the first question would be, well, what's going through your head? What thoughts are happening for you? And then those thoughts are things that we can work with and that we can influence and kind of make work for us or against us. So yes, that the first piece is emotion is data. And that's going to help us get you to your best place mentally and emotionally going into the ring. Also, I think if we take away all uncomfortable emotion, it's basically you're numbing yourself. So there's like, you could see how that would be a good thing. Okay, can I just be in like this neutral middle? But I have to say that when you take away the possibility of feeling the hard emotions, it also takes away your ability to experience the more positive emotions. So we don't want to go through life and showing numb and just that it works both ways. And I think we come from a culture right now that can like err on the side of being pretty toxically positive, where we feel like no matter what, you need to be happy, grateful, and find the silver lining in every situation. And frankly, there are a lot of situations that you are going to be in every day at a show that really warrant some deep and intense emotions. So if you go into a championship show and don't perform the way you want to, I don't think there's anything wrong with you feeling disappointed and feeling pretty in the dumps for a little while. That seems like a very reasonable response. Now, do we want you to live there forever and sort of get stuck in that emotion? No. But I think there is a really important piece of just allowing the authentic part of who we are as human beings, which is a fully feeling person, be present, even at shows, even in the show ring, and learning ways of managing it so that, nobody wants to be in tears when you're in the show ring. That's not the place. But the more you push emotion away, the bigger it comes back. So a lot of the work is being able to just notice and sort of identify what's happening internally, and then feel empowered to make a decision. What do I want to do with this? And where do I want to go next when it comes to my emotions? And then go there. So I hope that answers your question, but I think that is one of those misconceptions that comes in is like, ooh, we've got to stop feeling.
Mm-hmm.
No way. It just brings more. When you get through those hard times and those hard moments, it makes the good times even better and more worth it. And so holding on to that duality is really important.
It's interesting to me that you talk about that disappointment is okay, because like you said, the whole culture of being super positive and, you have to be a good loser, so to speak, at anything other than having a smile on your face and being happy about it seems like you're having sour grapes. So is it anything beyond just acknowledging your disappointment and moving on from it there? Or do you set you give yourself 24 hours to kind of be miserable about it and then move on? Or what do you kind of say to that?
Yeah. I mean, I usually say that whatever, it's context dependent, obviously. So we're not going to put a definitive timeline on it, but, that you really allow yourself to feel. And clearly, just like with kids, there are appropriate and inappropriate ways, right? Like you don't need to throw a fit in the barn aisle, but permission to feel. And so whether that's I'm going to take 10 minutes and I'm going to go in my truck and I'm going to just, have a little meltdown. I'm going to cry to my spouse or, whoever it is. I'm going to let this out. I'm not going to try to pretend like it's not happening. But then I'm going to figure out, okay, and now what do I want to do with this? And where do I go next? So it's not that we don't learn from, and kind of say, what did I learn from that struggle that I just experienced? That's sort of the next step. And then you move there. You consciously move there. So it's really that permission to feel and figure out what works best for you for how you want to make that happen.
What does people that tell you, and I'm not begrudging trainers by any means, but it seems like we hear a lot of times that they'll say, just relax, go out and do it. Or your parents will say, just go have fun. But that never really seems to be helpful.
Yes.
But it's true. So
right.
What about that?
Yeah. I mean, that again, it's another really common thing that I hear, especially when I'll say to a client, how would you like to feel? That's a question I ask a lot. When you go into that show ring, let's talk about how you want to feel so that we can have what we're going towards. And more often than not, I hear the word relaxed. I want to feel relaxed and I want to feel calm. So absolutely, totally get it. That is what I think we want to feel. But as we've already discussed, if you look at any top rider, look at the riders in the Olympics, any of the riders in any discipline, I don't think what they are feeling when they go into their peak performance is relaxed. And so I often reframe that to say, I want to feel focused, right? I want to feel, if you think about what it really means to be in the zone, it means that you are in that state of flow where your mind is immersed in the process of what you're doing, and everything else seems to kind of fade away. That is it's a state of focus that you're in. So it's also relax and calm and have fun are like are really inaction. It's like a state of not being. And that's really hard for our brain to understand. It's like, I want you to go out there and not be. Does that make sense? How do I do that? Especially when you're feeling anxious, for somebody to say like, oh, just relax. It's like, well, yeah, I know that's where I want to be. If I could do that, I would.
Right.
But tell me what I need to do here. So I really encourage people, trainers, supports people to kind of move away from that word relax and think about what is the feeling I'm going for, and what is the focus that I'm going to wrap my head around. So go in there, and I want you to feel determined. Now, determined is something that your brain can latch onto and say, oh, what would that look like? What would that feel like? What thoughts need to go through my head to have that sense of determination? And that even that, like, just go out there and have fun. That's pretty, like, what does that really look and feel like for a rider going into the show ring? That it's very abstract. So to really think about words and feelings and directives, that your brain has something to hook and latch onto, because that is going to help let all the extraneous stuff fall to the wayside and give your brain that like really tunnel vision focus of what you're going for. There's nothing worse than feeling anxious and having somebody say, just relax.
I literally was sitting here when you were asking, like, what would you want to feel going into the show pen? And I was like, I have all of the feelings I don't want, but I've never actually thought about what I want to feel when I'm going in there. So I was sitting here like contemplating that. I was like, I've never actually thought about what I want to feel when I'm in there. I just know I don't want to feel so anxious.
Right. Yeah. And you know what's so interesting, and it sounds so simple when we actually get it out there. But first of all, if you tell yourself, I don't want to feel anxious, if you focus on what you're moving away from, your brain doesn't actually translate the I don't want. And when you say the word anxious, what you think and feel and picture is anxiety, or the feelings of anxiety. So there's this whole dynamic piece of language that's important to think about. So the little trick and the little tool that I tell everybody is, when you get into, especially if you're in the what ifs in your head, like, what if I go in there and I just, lose it? Or what if I go in there and I completely forget what I'm supposed to be doing? The words and the focus is on the thing that you don't want to have happen. So the tool that I give, I call it the $1 million question. And it works in anything in life. It's not just for riding. But what we say, there's this little formula, and you say, what do I need to do to make blank happen? And in the blank, you fill in what you want to have happen. So it's the positive, meaning the thing you're going towards. So if you're worried, like, what if my horse spooks at the in-gate, something like that? That's the thought. What spook at the in-gate? You're picturing that time and time again. But if we can flip that to say, what do I need to do to keep my horse's attention on me? What that does is, first of all, it's giving you the image of what you're going for. And then what happens is your brain starts to come up with the solutions. Okay, so, and hopefully you have, again, 2 or 3 things. I'm going to make sure that I put my leg on and ask them to go forward, that I flex a little to the inside, that whatever it is for you and your horse. So instead of just thinking about the what if, it's giving your brain the focus of the things that you can do to put yourself in the best situation possible with what you have to control. So there's so much to it. I mean, I love this work because there's so much that we can do. Little shifts can make huge changes in the way you experience riding under pressure.
What would you say to a writer that struggles with performance anxiety or feels a lot of pressure before they even get to the show pen? I mean, I remember as a kid and the week leading up to a show, I was always excited to go. But as the days went on and maybe 2-3 days out, it started to feel like a little bit of nerves, but it was excitement. And then the day before, the night before, it was like full-fledged nerves. Like, I don't want to do this. I'm so nervous. I'm getting sick. So what's happening in our brains there, and what are some troubleshooting strategies to go about those?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, normalizing it and just saying, yep, okay, I know that leading up to a competition, or I'm gonna feel those nerves. But I think the other thing is anxiety automatically either pulls us into the future or pulls us back into the past. So you're either thinking about what you're imagining might happen, or you're thinking about a past experience and, kind of ruminating on what happened. And the more we can get our focus on the present moment, and it's this moment that we can control right now, the more we can mediate between our anxiety and what we need to be doing. So all comes back to, again, thinking about, first of all, what are the thoughts that are going through my head that are creating this anxiety? So there's all different, there's performance pressure, there's that comparison pressure, there's the anticipatory anxiety. So you get anxious about your anxiety. What if I start to feel anxious and then I feel anxious about possibly being anxious? There's so many different levels. And if we can try to pull ourselves back into what can I do right now in this moment to set myself up in the best way possible for whether it's the next day, the next week. That's why a lot of people make lists. They, kind of create their plan. Or, I really encourage people to come up with a mental warm-up routine so that you're thinking about, how do I want to feel? What do I need to do to create that feeling in terms of the process? And the icing on the cake is, since we've said this a couple of times, that it's really your thoughts that create the feelings. And so if you can spend some time, again, saying, my crystal ball tells me that when I get to the show, I'm probably going to feel this, this, and this, and which is going to make me behave in this way. And ahead of time, come up with some really anchoring thoughts that put you in a different state. Then you have that. It's like your security blanket, like, oh, I know that thought, that automatic thought's going to come in. Like, oh my gosh, who do I think I am? I shouldn't be here. I'm not ready yet. I'm going to look like a fool. All of those things. But if you have already created something to talk about, I call that the itty bitty shitty committee, which is that inner voice in your head that's just like, it is telling you every single thing that might possibly go wrong and how you're definitely going to screw it up, and you're going to just fold under pressure, and you're going to embarrass your trainer, and, everything. The itty bitty shitty committee comes just in time, right before you go in and put yourself out there and are vulnerable, and maybe even step up into, like, out of your comfort zone and into a new level. And we need to meet the itty bitty shitty committee with, rather than saying, I have to push it away, we need to meet it with some comebacks, basically, and have those ready ahead of time so that you can say, actually, I've done a lot of preparation for this. I've done this before. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do my best out there, and, any number of things. But that preparation ahead of time is so important. And I recommend that it happens well before the show or the competition, not just, like, any time is good. I'd rather have people prepare the night before than not at all. But all of this work, our brain goes to what it knows best. And oftentimes what it knows best is that negative thought. because it's trying to keep you safe and keep you from pushing out of your comfort zone. So it takes a lot of effort to shift those thoughts and shift those beliefs. And it's not like a light switch that we can just turn off and turn on. It's something that we have to notice. Ooh, I'm going down that path that's leading me to that feeling that I know doesn't make me ride well. So let me practice this other path as often as I can before I'm in the hot seat, before I've reached that level of pressure that it's hard to come back from. And that's just, it's giving you that leg up to be able to make shifts and changes before it's too late, basically.
How long in advance does it typically take somebody to make progress with kind of rewiring their brain's thoughts and whatever? Like how far, if you have, say, a world show and we'll just throw it out in December. I'm sure it's different for everybody, of course, but what's your ideal scenario?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's totally different for everybody. So I wouldn't say there's a prescribed amount of time because frankly, these beliefs that we're working through and working with often have been developing for our entire life. So, it starts with things that we interpreted in our childhood and that teacher in second grade who told you, who made you feel ashamed for the grade you got. And it's layers and layers of evidence that your brain has built to kind of build these beliefs as truth. So I would say on some level, we have a lot of techniques that we can put into play that I would call kind of Band-Aid techniques. Like you can start doing this work a couple weeks before a show, and we're going to be able to scratch the surface and give you a slightly different experience. But in order to really make these organic shifts so that you are actually walking through life and showing and pressure situations differently in a way that feels like your new truth, that takes time. The program that I offer is 5 months long, and 5 months is the time that I really feel like people can either get to a different place or really have an understanding of the process to be able to continue the work and deepen it on their own. So, that can give you a little gauge for 5, 6 months, a year. This is life work. And it really, what I love about it is not just limited to your riding. Once you start to do this work and understand the power of shifting your focus in order to build new beliefs that are going to work for you, it's life-changing in every domain of your life, which is, obviously so empowering to all of us.
Yeah, I don't think it's an overnight fix. And we definitely don't get into these thought processes overnight. What would you say if somebody is just extremely nervous? I call it on game day morning or whatever, like actual day of showing. What's a few things or one thing people can do to kind of ease your nerves day of?
Yeah. First of all, I really encourage people to think about the environment that is going to be the most conducive to finding that sense of focus in your process. So when I say that, what I mean is when it gets down to, the hour before it's time to get on and get going, do you need to have people around you? Are you somebody that likes to have that support with you? Or are you somebody that needs to have a little bit more of a bubble to be, a little bit more quiet space? What are the parts of getting ready there are obviously parts that you have to do, but there are also parts that maybe you don't have to do, but are things that you enjoy doing and that sort of connect you to your horse and to the process. Know what it is that gets you feeling grounded and connected when it comes to the lead up. So that's one thing. And again, that's something that you can think about ahead of time and communicating that with your support system, whether it's your trainer, your parents, your spouse, your barn friends, being really clear, this is what I need in that hour or couple hours of time prior to showtime, and talking about it ahead of time is important. And then I really encourage people to have it can be a simple mental warm up routine that you do prior to getting on. And for people that are just dipping their toe into this for the first time, what that can consist of is sitting down and saying, for this class that I'm going into right now, these are my 2 or 3 goals that I'm really going to be committed to. And this goes back to those focus points. Those goals are probably going to be connected to the focus points. So the 2 or 3 things that if I can, when I come out of the ring, if I feel like I've really given those what they deserve, I'm going to feel successful regardless of what the outcome is, the placing, the score. These are the things that are important for me to feel like I've focused on and accomplished in there. So that takes the huge kind of overwhelming amount of this is what I need to think about and puts it into a nice container for you. And then again, I encourage people to really think about, how do I want to feel in the ring? How do I want to show up in there? And I actually have a sheet of paper at my desk that has all different emotions and feelings on it, because we tend to rely on the big ones, as we've talked about: anxious, calm, sad, mad. But there is so much out there that when you can find that, we call it emotional granularity. It's where you take an emotion and turn it into almost a creative process. And if you can say, I want to go in there and feel fully present and engaged with my horse, that is going to give you something to chew on in there versus, as we've talked about, I want to go in and be relaxed. So really being clear, what would feel good? How do I want to show up in the ring today? And letting your brain really focus on that word and that feeling. And last but not least, I would say that wonderful thing called breathing that we tend to forget to do. Right. So the type of breathing that I really recommend people do, it's called 4-7-8 breathing. I always joke with people because I think most of us know, on some level, oh yeah, I have to breathe, take deep breaths, take deep breaths. Well, if you just sit there and take deep breaths, what actually often ends up happening is you hyperventilate, because you're literally just, it's like almost this out of control breathing, and your brain goes, that's too much. So to have a way of breathing that is actually going to communicate a sense of safety to your brain is really beneficial. So 4-7-8 breathing, it's as simple as breathing in through your nose for 4 counts, holding your breath for about 7, and then breathing out through your mouth, ideally, for 8. It's a pattern of breathing that emphasizes the out breath, and the out breath is what communicates calm and safety to our brain. So if you do 2 or 3 rounds of 4-7-8 breathing, even throughout your day, it can be a morning ritual that you can get into so that it's something that's really familiar to you. But that pattern of breathing will ground you very, very quickly. And I'll just add, I always tell people, don't get too hooked on the exact numbers. Like, oh my gosh, did Meredith say it was 5-7-9 or 4-3? Just remember the in breath is the shortest, hold for a little bit, and the out breath is the longest. And ideally, it's about your in breath is about half as long as your out breath. So, we always want to give the the cheat sheet, right? Because when you're in it and you're like, I know I'm supposed to breathe, but I can't remember the exact numbers. Just focus on the out breath, and you'll be good to go. So find times to remember to do a couple rounds of that, and you'll notice a huge difference in your nervous system.
I kind of have an off the wall type of question in regards to how the amateurs, mostly the amateurs, I'm not sure about in the dressage world, but in our neck of the woods and showing and riding, we have a lot of amateurs that like to drink the day of the show. Do you feel like drinking would have a more of a I don't want to say like negative impact, but do you think it would increase the anxieties that they're trying to get rid of versus helping them get rid of the anxiety?
So, my most simple and direct answer to that would be, does drinking numb the anxiety? Yes, it does. But does it also take your brain out of a place of being able to be on and focused and present with your horse and with the process that you need to be uh, doing? Yes, it does. So if the goal is to lessen anxiety, you will accomplish that. Is it going to increase and benefit your performance? I would dare to say no, it is not. In fact, it has the potential to probably impair your performance, because no matter what discipline you are doing, your connection and presence in the moment with your horse and navigating what is happening in this moment with me or next to me, regardless, depending on what you're doing, and being able to respond to that quickly is really the key to success. And sometimes, we know that sometimes the best performance looks like nothing is happening out there, but there is actually that beautiful symmetry happening between horse and rider. And if you're numbing yourself, you're numbing your ability to be present in the moment also. So on the surface, of course, the anxiety, it gets lessened, it gets numbed, but I don't think it's a coping skill that in the end really benefits.
Definitely.
I have a couple questions unrelated to show pen specifically, but before we move on from that, Liz, did you have any other questions about the show pen?
No. This was definitely very insightful. I personally needed all of this.
I think there's a lot of us that can. Alrighty. So outside of the show pen, but more of a broad subject, is there any tips you can give us on how to know if you are paired with the right horse or the right trainer, or whether it may be time to move on or change from?
Oh, yes. That's a big one. And, I'd say, the horse and the trainer, we could kind of put into two different, we could do a whole podcast on either one of those, of course. If we look at the horse piece, first of all, most often what I'm assessing from my perspective, I'm not the client's trainer. I'm often not even seeing them in person with their horse. I have clients that are all over the country and all over the world that I'm working with. But really, it comes down to, if we go back to, first of all, safety is number one. Always.
Safety net.
So even though a lot of my work is about
too.
helping people to be able to push out of their comfort zone and to, work through anxiety, there's a piece of this that we do an inherently risky sport. And none of this is to say that we do not want to get rid of the internal voice that's there to keep you safe, that says, I don't think this is a good situation for me. I'm not comfortable being on this horse because it's displaying behaviors that I'm not feeling capable of handling. So we want to make sure that oftentimes we have a horse that might be at a different level than we're at, and that's not a bad thing. We just want to make sure that we have the resources to be able to make it work and that you're setting yourself up for success. So that's obviously along like the safety lines. There's also going to be horses that can really trigger our internal belief systems of like, I'm not good enough. I don't have what it takes. That's a little bit more dynamic to work through, because if we think about our belief system as something that basically your brain is looking to confirm that negative belief as much as possible. So if you're thinking, I'm not good enough, just as a very basic example, and you're on a horse that is really challenging your every move, every time your brain is basically scanning your ride for any moment where you are not succeeding or where you are not getting the answer that you want. And then it latches onto it and it says, see, I told you you stink, like you do not have what it takes. And it gives those moments a lot of energy. And what we're looking to do is to also notice the other moments that are probably also happening, that 4 out of 5 times you actually get a good response. It's that 5th time that something else happens. But if you're on a horse that it feels like, again, the joy is drained out of the process because you're constantly being triggered into a place of negativity, that's something that we take into consideration. I always say you have a choice what you want to put your energy into. And that's not to say that you can't work through a dynamic like that with a horse, but you do have a choice if that is where you want to put your time and energy. And there's no right or wrong answer there. And there's not this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do. It's really about saying, what's going to work for me? And I'm willing to put the work into it. Again, I get riders, they're so committed, they will work their tail off to make a relationship with a horse work. But at some point, we have to zoom out and say, and what could also be true, or what could also be possible if we change this dynamic? So that's the horse piece, and there's lots of layers to it. The trainer piece, it's similar in terms of we all have different frameworks that we come into being in a trainer-student relationship. That comes from our history with our parents, our history with our teachers, anybody that's in sort of a power position. So we come with a lot of narratives already around what it means to be in a teacher-student relationship. And that's why there's a style piece that you just have to be aware of. The piece that's important to me that's most important to me is that when we're working with somebody that's dealing with anxiety or fear, that there's a good match there in terms of how it's communicated, sort of the conversations that are happening between the trainer and the student, and then a real understanding of what the plan forward is. And it has to be a conversation. The worst thing you can do is push yourself too far, too fast out of your comfort zone when you're dealing with a fear. And that doesn't mean you avoid the thing that you're fearful of or anxious about, but it's a dance. And we often expect our trainers to also have these honorary degrees in psychology where our trainers are there to give you the expertise on riding and horses. And there's an aspect of this work that is so mental and psychological. And some people are in touch with that because maybe they've had to be, they've experienced it themselves. And some trainers are fabulous trainers, but just don't have the understanding of how to work with somebody that's in a real place of fear. And that's an important conversation, just like the horse conversation of, this isn't going to be easy, and it's never easy. Working through hard things is not easy, but you have a choice into what works for you and what you want to put your energy and time into. Those are some of the hardest conversations I think that we have to have, and the hardest kind of sitting with it and saying what's right for me in this moment it's an important piece of the work.
Awesome. Well, I feel this has been extraordinarily helpful and insightful, and it all seems so simple, but until we can hear it from an expert, it doesn't really process to our brains as well. So Liz, did you have any final questions for Meredith before we kind of wrap things up today?
I think I am good for the moment. It was very, like Jenna said, insightful, and just you always have to hear it from somebody else before you're going to implement it. And no matter how many times you sit there and get aggravated with yourself, you're not gonna try to change anything. You're just gonna try to suffocate it. So it was definitely very helpful for me. I personally have taken a year off of showing, so I just told Jenna earlier today I had my hunt seat gelding up for sale because the thought of me going back into a show pen was so overwhelming, and I just get anxious thinking about it. But I made the decision earlier this week that I was keeping him, and we're going to try to show again if I can get myself to do it.
Good for you. Now you have some new tools to play with.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes. This came at the perfect time, like perfect. So yes, I'm super excited to try to implement some of these things.
Awesome. You just keep thinking, what are the thoughts that are coming up for me? And know that you have control over those.
Exactly. It's scary to think that I have control over that, you know?
Absolutely.
It's a lot of personal responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Can I just say one more quick thing before we finish that really that's connected to that? And I would say it's like one of the most important pieces. I can't believe I haven't brought it up until now. But Liz, like even given your situation, when your current state when it comes to thinking about showing is, we could imagine it's those beliefs of like, I don't have what it takes with this horse, I can't make it happen. I'm not good enough. Pretty far on one end of the spectrum. We could say they're pretty negative beliefs, right? And I think the most important thing for people to realize is that our next step is not to go from that to, I'm the top of the world. I can do anything. And I'm the best rider out there. Like we think that that's where we have to go next, is to insert that really positive thought and that really positive belief. If you try to insert that thought into your brain right now, your brain is going to go, whatever. Like, that's ridiculous, right? Like it's not true. And it feels like a costume that you're putting on. And you're like, I think I'm supposed to think this really uber positive thought because that's what we do, right? And what it ends up doing is it's like that thought just slips right away and you go right back into the old pattern again because it's too far from where you currently rest. So the first step is to just think, what would 5% more confidence look like, sound like, and feel like? Taking those really small baby steps so that if you think a thought, if you create a thought that's just 5% different, and it might even be neutral. We usually go for the neutral thought first of like, well, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to ride. It's not, it's not going to be horrible and it's not going to be great. I'm just going to go in there and ride, So like something really mundane. That is the next step. And it's something that like your brain can say, well, you can do that. Like maybe you won't make a total fool out of yourself. You can go in there and just ride, go through the motions. The most important next step is that it has to feel believable to you. And you go for that one next and go for that 5% or 10% difference. Then after you do that, and that feels like, okay, now this is my new way of being. Then you go for 5 or 10% more, with maybe the ultimate goal being that eventually you get to a place of saying, you know what, I think I can go into that show ring and rock it. And, like, unless something really major comes up, I really feel like we're going to go and do awesome. And I'm a great rider and I have a great relationship with this horse and I know my stuff. Like you can get there, but you don't need to get there as your first step from the place you're in right now. So I would say, regardless of the context and who we're dealing with, that's always what we start with is like, let's just look at the next step and go there, because that's going to feel real and it's going to be sustainable and it's going to keep going versus something else that's going to feel like, oh my gosh, I can try that on for 5 minutes, but then it's gone. So I hope that's helpful.
Definitely. Yes.
Super powerful. I think, and I do fitness and nutrition coaching for equestrians. And that's exactly what I teach is don't try and be perfect. Let's just focus on the next step. But it never has really occurred to me, at least before working with you, about how to do that with my own riding and working with horses, and to not go from 0 to perfect overnight. And anything less than that is a failure. So,
right. And actually the parallel to the physical fitness piece of like, you wouldn't go from lifting 10 pounds to lifting 110 pounds and think that that was going to work for your body. Right. But we think that our brain is going to work differently. Like, nope, you got to do this incrementally and build up, because your brain it's like the thought process is a muscle basically that you're building. So it's really helpful to have somebody in the fitness industry, because it's like, oh yeah, that's right. We wouldn't do that to our body.
Yeah. There's a lot of parallels there for sure.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
alrighty. Well, we will get this wrapped up today since we have taken up enough of your time. We really thank you for being on, but please do tell us about your mental half halt program, how that works, and then where everybody can find you at.
Awesome. Yeah. So the program I offer, it's called the Mental Half Halt Program. Like I said, it's a 5-month program where we really dive into all the layers of this. And I work with folks who are, again, dealing with maybe they've had a fall and they're working through some fear issues. It can be performance anxiety, or it can just be, like, I really want to work on how to ride to my best potential and have the most joy in this process. So it doesn't have to be a crisis that brings you to coming and doing the program. And the best way to get started and just like reach out and see if it's a good fit is to go to my website, which is www.meredithbrisson.com. And on there, you can sign up for what I call an introductory session. It's a free 45-minute phone call where we can just talk about, what's going on, what's coming up for you, and how we might work together, and then go from there. So you can put yourself right on the schedule from my website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Meredith, for being on. I know this is going to be very valuable to all of our listeners, and we may have to get you back on for a round 2 sometime, or 3 or 4 when, this could be an endless amount of topics that we could go down the rabbit hole with. So thank you for your time today.
Absolutely.
All right, that'll be your class. Bring them in and line them up.